Flies, conspiracies, and canceled debates. Welcome to Political Perch, Episode 9.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Political Perch Podcast, a bi weekly podcast that talks about current events, politics, presidents, history, and anything that is plaguing the United States of America. Join us.
Hey guys, welcome again to another Political Perch podcast. I'm Ashton,
And I'm Andy.
and it has been, compared to other weeks, Andy, I don't want to say slow week because I don't know if you can call a week where two governors get threatened to be kidnapped slow, but it's been not as chaotic. Let's say that. Uh, yeah, Andy, let's kind of get into our state of the race, our first segment. I think our both of our map from last week hasn't really changed as much. Where we kind of had Biden winning all the swing states, and toss ups in Georgia and Texas. Andy, initially, do you think last week changed much in the race?
Not really, honestly. I think Biden still has a pretty healthy lead. I think, we'll get into this more when we talk about the polls, but Biden has got, his highest margin of differential so far in this race, but it's not really going to change the landscape of the electoral college much. Biden's still going to win most of the swing states and have a pretty healthy margin, so not much change since last week.
hmm Yeah, I definitely think we both can say that it's pretty clear now that that debate really, I don't want to say really hurt, but it did have an impact on some undecideds. That number went down some. Biden's favorability went up a little. I mean, Trump didn't fall too much because of the debate, but I just feel like in general that debate did have some negative impact. Um, well, let's kind of go to. I like to use RCP's no toss up map in general because it was the closest thing in 2016. It got four states wrong. One for Clinton, it got Nevada wrong. It had Trump winning that, and the three Midwest states wrong for Trump: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. So I like to look at this map because it was the closest thing, and right now it has 358 to Biden and 180 to Trump. So for all those people who are like the polls are wrong, I mean, if you just we'll kind of go into that deeper in our third segment, but just for example, if the no toss up map in RCP is as wrong as it was in 2016 and you give all the states to Trump, or you give four swing states, like let's say the polls are so critically wrong like in 2016, but four of them go to Trump when they should go to Biden, Trump still loses by 20 electoral votes. So that's how daunting of a hole Trump is in right now. Andy, what's your initial response to right now RCP's no toss up poll um, map? Because right now they switched back Georgia to Trump. So right now the averages in Georgia, it's basically anyone's game in Georgia. In Texas, Trump has a 3-point lead. So what's your kind of initial reactions to that?
Yeah, when people want to try to, we'll talk about this again more later when we compare the 2 years, but when people want to say all the time, 2016, the polls are completely wrong, so I'm not going to trust polls this year or whatever they may say like that, they have to understand that margin of error does account for stuff like that. 2016, when you lose to stuff, places like Michigan, he was within the margin of error. So it wasn't as if the polls were wrong, so to say, but more as the margin of error was correct, and people don't really understand that. If you want to know more about polls, go check our YouTube video out about, our poll video myths and facts about that. We'll leave it up in the right hand corner. We'll link to that, but go check that out. But yeah, Ashton, I find it crazy that Biden is basically ahead. the margin of error point, basically meaning that even if everything bad goes in his favor or everything good goes for Trump, he should still pull away. Either by like you said, 20 electoral votes, 30, it'll be a close race, but he should still win. So Biden's got a good, healthy lead. I think there's still states like Georgia that's on the fringe. I know you're very keen on Texas. I still think that will be Trump, but I think Biden's going to win. I think it'll be a little bit healthier than Clinton's loss was and Trump's win was in 2016. But I think Biden's still going to win on election day.
Yeah, Andy. I mean, when it comes to Texas, I think Biden has to be within a point polling wise to pull that one off. He isn't currently, but we'll kind of see. I expect it to tighten a little, that state particularly. Um, I will say, like, I saw tweets from Trump Jr. where he was like, "Oh, don't trust the polls. Look at this picture of Trump's rallies, maskless, may I add." Um, and Biden's rallies, and they show a side shot of Biden at what was a drive-in speech, which is kind of like comparing apples and oranges almost, but trying to prove, oh, hey, look, Biden has no actual enthusiasm, which to me is a kind of weird grasping at straws comparison. It's just weird how some people are trying to make it out like the polls were completely incorrect in 2016 and trying to compare it to now because they're two different elections. And
I also think, Ashton, just the whole Trump campaign has just been really weird in some of their attack ads as of late. I don't know if you agree with this, but like, I know they just posted a video that was wrong. They used Dr. Fauci's words out of context to try to prove a point that Fauci was trying to say that Trump handled the virus correctly. It was weird. They're constantly doing stuff like that, just trying to lie or, like you said, use things against Biden that really doesn't make a lot of sense. So I don't know what's coming out of that campaign, but I mean, they really got to turn it around if they want any shot of winning.
yeah, not to mention Trump's campaign pulled money out of both Ohio and Iowa. I mean, they're still spending somewhat in Arizona, but it's like it's weird because it looks like they're completely broke compared to Biden. Like you see Biden now sending people to Texas, sending money to Texas, and a lot of Democrats are kind of freaking out, like, "Oh, don't make the Hillary mistake." And it's kind of like people need to realize Biden has way more. It's not just that Biden is leading in these swing states, his polls aren't up and down, and we'll get into that more in our third segment, but there's something to be said with the certain amount of undecideds there are in this election compared to 2016. Like, no election's the same as the one 4 years ago, and people make that mistake. All right, Andy, let's go ahead and mention before our next segment um the two kind of big things happening this week or have happened. The FBI comes out announcing that they stopped the plot against the Michigan governor to be kidnapped, and the FBI today just came out saying that there was similar plot by the same group to kidnap the Virginia governor. Um I mean, Andy, this is just weird.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty weird, Ashton, but like people are crazy at times like this. You know how COVID's been affecting the whole country, and it's a very trying time, very anxious time, and there's even people that before all the racial tensions, we had all those people out on the front steps of states, arguing and protesting to get a haircut. So we're having kind of the same thing where people are just tired of it, and maybe wanting just to get governors out of Democrat-run states. I don't condone it. Obviously, it was awful. That should never happen. I'm glad the FBI stopped it, but crazy times we live in.
Yeah, it's pretty sad when a possible kidnapping of a governor is not the most newsworthy thing in a week. Um, that's the crazy times we live in, and even when that isn't like a big deal because of comparison to what's been happening last 2 or 3 weeks, it's pretty insane. Um, there's also the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation hearings. We're not making that a segment because we me and Andy both agree that there's nothing really newsworthy about it because she's going to get confirmed. There was a slight chance that with the super spreader event in the White House, that might get enough senators with COVID that it might push it back a few weeks. They're still pushing through with it. I think that kind of shows Mitch McConnell's view on the race itself. You can't read too much into it, but it does show you they're not super confident in wanting to push it through a lame duck session. And they're just going to try to get it done as soon as possible, which is, their prerogative. It's not like what some people on the left are saying. It's constitutional, guys. Don't make that a point of view. I know some of our liberal listeners aren't going to agree with me and yours view of her as a justice and whether she's good on that front or not. We're just not, and that's okay. But her confirmation is a valid thing. Are Republicans complete hypocrites for pushing through her nomination, unlike Merrick Garland's? Yeah, they're hypocrites. But ultimately, it's constitutional what they're doing, just like you're going to hear the same type of arguments when Democrats try to pack the courts in a few years. I mean, that will be constitutional. And, I'm going to say the same thing, which is I don't agree with it. But ultimately, when you play pure power politics like Republicans have the last 4 years in the Senate, you can't complain when Democrats get in and they do the exact same thing. I don't agree with either side doing it. That makes me unique compared to other people. But ultimately, like, hey, Ben Shapiro's going to complain about it when Democrats do it, but he's happy when Republicans do it. That's life.
Yeah, Ash, and I'm always in the camp of I do believe that if a president's elected, he should be able to nominate any judges for 4 years. My problem lies with, like you said, the hypocrisy with the Republican Party because of what happened in 2016 with Garland, and then now what's happening now. They're just pushing everybody through, even though people like Lindsey Graham himself said I would not, like his words on tape saying he would not vote for someone if a vacancy opened in the last year of a presidency of Trump or either Cruz is what his words said. So the hypocrisy is the problem, not of what they're actually doing. Um, a lot of the debates the first day of the hearings were just about the Affordable Care Act and how the Democrats really don't want to fill the seat because they don't want the Affordable Care Act to be up for debate, up for removal. And basically the Republicans don't care. And Lindsey Graham just said it's not really even, it's irrelevant due to the hearings because it's a difference between a judge and a politician. So, like you said, she's going to get confirmed. Democrats are going to try to stall as long as they can, but it won't matter. There's enough Republicans in the Senate to just be able to go through it pretty quickly, and we're going to get a pretty heavy conservative leaning Supreme Court.
Well, at least until Democrats, which I think both me and they will try, or they will pack the court. They'll probably add 2 more justices. And I just think the pearl clutching by the right on this issue is just, it's just so hypocritical. And it's like, they want to sit there and lecture people about how that breaks judicial norms. Like, come on, you guys have just completely ignored judicial norms when it comes to Trump. I'm not excusing what Democrats are going to do. I don't think they should do it. It will cause a long term struggle where every time the Senate changes, it's going to be one side adding to the court, another side adding to the court, and it's going to be bad for the Supreme Court. But ultimately, what the Republicans have been doing have been bad for the Supreme Court. So, to me, that's kind of like a draw from both sides on this issue. So, Andy, let's go ahead and move on to our.
I will say real quick, actually, before we move on, with the packing the courts thing, constitutionally, there's nowhere that says they can't pack the courts. But like you said, it's just tradition that it's really never been done before. It will set a precedent that it's okay to any time, you're a judge comes in and it's not of your party, you're allowed to just keep adding until it's even. You can think and believe what you want. If you want to have I like having even Supreme Courts. It makes political proceedings a lot more 50-50. It makes it more about the Constitution and not about politics. But we don't want to get a precedent that's going to be always, let's always pack the courts anytime stuff like that happens. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
hmm So, Andy, let's kind of do a deeper dive because we haven't yet on 2016 versus 2020. I know we talk about it a lot and we mention it, but some people, like especially our Democrat listeners, will be like, "Yeah, but I trusted the polls in 2016, and Hillary still lost in the Electoral College." And then the Republican listeners are kind of you know what I mean, Andy. They're like, Trump won it last time and he'll win it this time. So what is really different? Well, between April and this point in 2016, which is like mid-October, there are 4 national vote changes. So even on national polling, there are 4 changes, lead changes. Hillary's support ranged between April and this point in 2016 between 10 points and to losing in the national polls by a point between her and Trump. There were 3 points where she hit polling highs, which is 8 to 10 points, and would go to drop that to even a tie to losing. So there were 10 points between these 4 months where she would go up and then instantly go down like a roller coaster. I did a calculation, and you know this, I have a lecture matrix where I keep track of my own stats and stuff like that. So, Andy, in 2016, there was a modern history high of an average change in polls between every 10 polls of 2.5 percentage points. That was a high for the last 5 elections. This election has even gone down to a 1.3% change in polls every 10 polls. So what does that mean? There are about 10 polls every week. That's the average. That means every week the polls only change a point, and that's not in favor of one candidate or the other. That's just their average change or their average variation. That means at best case scenario, Andy, in 3 weeks left, the polls could change if it all goes Trump's way, an average of like 4 points. And that's with a 8-point Biden lead in the polls. So you could see, like, best case scenario for Trump, the polls on election day show Biden with a 4-point lead, given my kind of rough calculations.
It's bad, Ashton. Biden, really unlike Hillary from the get-go, has had a lead and pretty much has kept it. And you can blame that on COVID. You can blame that on the economy falling. You can blame it on the taxes. You can blame it on all the different factors that there are. But unlike Hillary, it's not this up and down, back and forth where Trump caught the right wave at the right time and won a very close electoral college win, not popular vote win. Trump's not going to win the popular vote. That's completely decided. That he never was from the get-go. The question always was, can he get enough states to go his way and win the electoral college? Unlike with Clinton, there is no way for him to ride. Biden's had a lead. He's kept a lead. Trump has cut into that lead from time to time, but never enough that really he had a viable chance to win.
Mm-hmm.
So Trump should win election day. And then you can also go look at Georgia, who they just started voting yesterday, I believe, in the absentee in-person voting, where they had lines for 4 or 5 hours of people just standing waiting to vote. And they said, and then the election officials said the reason why the lines were so high was because they had a record turnout. And when you have record turnouts, that's all good in favor for Biden because there's usually a lot more Democrats that come out to vote than Republicans. So Biden needs to get that record turnout to just completely dominate and win against Trump.
Yeah, another difference between 2016 and 2020 is the amount of undecideds. And a lot of people don't understand when Hillary Clinton did have her 6, 7, 8-point leads, she was around 47, 48% in the polls. Biden is above 50% in the polls. And on election day 2016, there was around 11.5% undecided / third party voters in the polls. Now, in 2020, that's down to only 8%. And then when you take out undecideds and you say, oh, undecided is going to get around 4 points, that means there's only 3.8 or 4% undecideds left in the electorate. That means if Trump won 100% of the undecideds, he would still lose by 4 points. 4 points on this day. And that's around half or like 2% less undecideds than in 2016. That means Trump has to play it perfect, and even if he plays it perfect, he still loses by a bigger margin than he lost in 2016. And that's such a daunting hole.
It really shows just how important those undecided votes are for Biden. You look at Hillary Clinton, she was a historically hated candidate. So she wasn't very good at getting those undecided voters or any of those flip voters to get her, which is why she lost states like Michigan. She lost states like Pennsylvania because those undecideds all usually went for Trump. I wouldn't say all of them, but a good margin of them did, and enough did for him to get the victory. It's not like that this time around. We're seeing a lot of undecideds pretty much going with Biden, and a lot of Republicans are flipping to go to Biden. A lot of a surge has gone behind Biden just because of how disliked now Trump is than he was in 2016. And we're seeing all that surge carry Biden to that, above 5-6 point victory we're seeing. And if Trump can't get those undecideds, and I don't know how he can within this next 3 weeks, it's going to be a long night for him and one we expect him to lose.
Another thing I like to point out is I'm someone I tell people don't just look at a single poll. Don't just look at the polling average. Does all the supporting data support the thesis that this is like a 10-point Biden lead right now? And a poll just came out from, I don't love reading too much into congressional polls, but this one showed the Democrat leading in Missouri's 2nd congressional district by 3 points, 4 points. Now, Andy, if you didn't know, the Republican won by 2 points in Missouri 2nd in 2018, and Trump won the district by like 16, 18 points in 2016. So you can kind of see a transitioning of some of these suburban areas, and I believe it is a suburban area, Missouri. And you see deep red states, part of these deep red states kind of just going to the Democratic side, and it's a stark contrast to 2016.
It is actually. It's not really looking for good for Trump at all. I mean, and then you look at the Senate, right? The Senate for Republicans isn't looking good, and that's kind of why you go back to the Barrett confirmations. They're trying so hard to push it through. They know they're on borrowed time, but if they can get this senator, that's for life. They had their conservative lean for life, unless, of course, back in the court, but still, they're not really confident. We have a lot of close states, like I've said before in multiple videos, multiple podcasts. Lindsey Graham and Harrison are very close. We both believe Harrison can and probably will pull it off. It's going to be crazy to see. We might have, for the first time in a long time, a Democratic run House and a Democratic run Senate, along with the presidency.
All right, Andy, let's go ahead and move on to our third and final segment, talking about the state of the Senate. We don't typically give the Senate any love on this podcast. We may do it one more time before the election, but generally, because of presidential race and everything, we haven't been paying as much attention to it. And Andy, it is interesting. The Senate has been Republican for around 6 years when they flipped it. And the Senate races this year, there are a lot of interesting ones. Right now I have it going to the Democrats 52-48, a very close Senate map. And if people are wondering at home, or sorry, I have it 53-47. And if people are wondering at home, I have the Republicans flipping Alabama, but Democrats flipping Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, North Carolina, Maine, and Georgia first, and South Carolina. So, Andy, initially the Senate map, I know you don't pay as much attention to the Senate races, but what's the biggest shocking close race to you? Because there are some shockers that are very close right now, like South Carolina, Alaska. Some people are saying even Mississippi could be close with Mike Espy. And, of course, you have Doug Jones down in Alabama, who's an incumbent that's, in the fight for his political life. What are some states that are like, you're like, wow, I can't believe the Republican incumbent is struggling. Like in Arizona, the Republican incumbent is losing to her challenger by like 9, 10 points in the polls right now.
I'm gonna be a little different and say Alaska is the one that's most shocking to me. Obviously, being from South Carolina, I don't really see it as a shocking, close in the race. We know how bad Lindsey Graham is, so it's not really shocking to me. But Alaska is the one that really shocks me right now because, you look on it, the Republican Senate, well, in Alaska is Dan Sullivan. He's getting challenged by Al Gross, who's an orthopedic surgeon. So he's not even a politician, he's just a surgeon, kind of like Ben Carson was. It's crazy to see, Gross is technically independent, but he is getting backed by Democrats. But it's crazy to see how close it is in Alaska, a state that's been Republican for a long, long, long time. And you look at some of the headlines of this race, it literally says Alaska Senate race rocked by leaked videos, China ties, and even a dead bear. So it's crazy over there in Alaska. I think it's a really close race. I like this one, and I can see that a Democrat flipping the seat.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely think Alaska is a interesting state because it's so small, and Senate, it's such a very weird, independent, streaky state. It's very much like Arizona, where it likes to elect candidates that go against the grain, even for the political party the state overall supports. Like John McCain was known as a maverick, and Alaska elected a senator that did a full write in campaign. You almost never see that in other states. Um, it's just an interesting state. Al Gross, I think, is running a very, very smart campaign. I mean, right now, the last poll to come out of Alaska showed with 1,000 registered voters, Sullivan only winning by 5 points, and that was 39-34. That's a lot of undecided voters, a lot. When you have both candidates in the 30s, that means there's like 15 to 20% undecided. So that race definitely can go either way. And Al Gross is just running a very competent campaign. And in this national environment, you even show Biden very competitive in Alaska. So if Biden can get it within 3 to 4 points, Al Grossman could get enough crossover voters where he could surprisingly win as an independent in Alaska, obviously caucusing with the Democrats.
It's going to be very interesting to see how many of these very close Republican held seats are going to be able to be flipped. We said, obviously, we think the Democrat in Alaska could do it. Mississippi is close. And obviously, we think Jamie Harrison is going to win. So it's going to be interesting to see just how many gets flipped.
Yeah, it's also interesting because there was a sexting scandal with the Democrat in North Carolina, and a few Republicans are like, "Oh, this is gonna be the thing that changes the race in North Carolina." And actually, Cal Cunningham's numbers have gone up since that came out. I don't condone what Cal Cunningham did. I think it was scummy. But Andy, it's something to be said that Republicans thought a sexting scandal would be the silver bullet to kill the Democrats' chances in North Carolina, just because of all the things Republicans have stomached with Trump scandals. Like, I'm sorry, it's 2020. If this was 2011, then maybe that sexting scandal would have killed, or like 2006, it would have killed Cal Cunningham's Senate chances. But this is 2020. Like, seriously, a sexting scandal? You think that's going to make a lot of change when we literally have plots to kidnap the Michigan governor and you have candidates just like, you know what I mean? Like that's just it. It to me, it was kind of like not a serious thing to look at, and it could have impacted Cal Cunningham, but by all accounts, it hasn't.
100% Ashton. It's crazy. Like, I see where the Republicans are coming from, saying his campaign is over, but honestly, we live in a time in a presidency in politics where things like that are just normal. You might lose a point or two, but you're not going to lose your lead if you have one. You look at Trump in 2016, everything that came out on him. Even Hillary with her emails didn't really affect her that too much. You look at now, all the things he's doing, and he's still president. So it's crazy, just the times we live in, that all these things are just becoming normal.
Hmm. Yeah, and I also think one of the reasons why I have Democrats picking up a seat in Georgia is I think Georgia is going to go to Biden. I really do think that now. I've come around to thinking that even with all the voter suppression stuff that some Republican state parties are doing, it just turnout's going to be so high, especially with African Americans. Like I think it's going to beat 2008 levels African American turnout. Um, and I don't think like that'll be enough to get Democrats one of the Senate seats, especially the regular Senate seat. I think it's John Ossoff. I think that'll be enough to push him over the edge. Is it enough to push him over the edge in the special election? I don't know. It kind of depends on who wins between Collins and Loeffler. I think if it's Loeffler, she will probably lose on the runoff. And if it's Collins, the congressman from Georgia, I think Collins might be able to hold it on in a runoff. And for our listeners who don't know, in Georgia, it's a jungle primary type system where you can have multiple candidates from same party run, and the top two vote getters are the two that move on to a runoff a few weeks later where it's just the top two vote getters facing and duking each other off. And typically those runoffs tend to be lower turnout, and that favors the Republicans, right? So to me, I feel like the Republicans have a slight advantage in the special election just because of how more competitive that is between a lot of the minor party candidates. All right, Andy, that was, or this will be one of the shorter podcasts we put up. We'll be doing this every week until the election, guys. Please like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and please comment and do everything you can to listen to our podcast. If you're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, that helps get more eyeballs or ears in this case onto this podcast. um, Andy, I'm loving doing these every week. It's a lot of work for us, but it's very gratifying to see a return on investment with people listening or viewing on YouTube. Andy, do you have any last comments?
We appreciate all you guys' support. Keep watching the podcast, and we're going to keep producing more and more content for you guys because we enjoy doing it, and we hope you guys enjoy watching.
All right. Everyone have a great, great Tuesday. We'll see how the election morphs and changes. Please follow our YouTube channel if you want some of our small reaction videos to big news if it drops, or well, when it drops, because we all know there's going to be 10 more October surprises, and we have no clue what it will be. It'll probably be nuclear hurricane or something stupid. So tune in, follow us, and you guys have a great Tuesday.